Welcome to Moments, the podcast, where we have conversations that matter. Hi, everyone. My name is Vasia Makris, your host and founder of Moments, a creative agency bridging art, culture, and technology. Joined by my amazing co-host, HardArt, each week we host a live X space deep diving into hot topics that are shaping the Web3 ecosystem. GM. Damn, Milton. Mr. Miami, you just got me in a mood. Thank you everyone for joining. My name is Vasia Makris, your host for Moments, the podcast. And that was our DJ, aka HardArt, aka Milton, my amazing co-host. Before we kick it off and really start the conversation today, I just want to ask everyone to help me out. Let's massage the algo. Let's get a couple more people in this room. Because honestly, I specifically wanted today's conversation to come from the community. I'm really curious what people's takes are, what their thoughts are. And I definitely know people are strongly opinionated. I was reading through a lot of tweets this week and people were raging. So let's get some people in the room. If we could just retweet the space, maybe tag a couple of people. I know I tagged two people that I specifically really wanted to hear from. I know they have interesting and very different takes as well. But yeah, for everyone that is, a lot of familiar faces. So thank you guys for joining and being the homies. But for those and listening back to the recording, I just want to give a very quick introduction to Moments the Agency, which is basically I'm founder and running Moments the Agency, and we're focused on art, culture, and technology, and basically bridging various industries and creating these experiences that connect, inspire, and really impact those around us. So in the last few months since our launch, we've worked with different brands, creators, and had a couple of experiences with events and production as well. Moments, the podcast, is our new kind of division. I can't believe we're already on episode 17. It's been a really fun ride. But I specifically started the podcast with Milton because I wanted to be at the forefront of these community conversations, to be really up to date with important Web3 trends, and ultimately to keep my finger on the pulse because I'm then able to better serve different clients and brands. So thank you guys that have been following. I know a lot of people have been here since day one. I really appreciate the support. If you do want to stay up to date, I have the newsletter pinned up. We send out weekly newsletters just reminding everyone about the conversation, keeping you updated and in the loop. And I also have another pinned tweet of just all the links to the major streaming platforms. I think one of the biggest disconnects with a lot of the people building in Web3 is perhaps not having the record and the archive of these conversations from Twitter. And I think they're very important. I'm also super curious how some of these conversations are going to age in a year or so. So yeah, we upload them on all the major streaming platforms, and it's available for those that want to go back and re-listen. So again, that's pinned up top. I also just want to give a chance to Milton to kind of quickly introduce himself because I've known him since pretty early on in my Web3 journey, and he has been a homie, a ride or die. We've done a lot of IRL events together, and I'm grateful that we've gotten to grow a lot as individuals in this space, and being able to do this podcast together has been a lot of fun. So Milton, thank you so much. And I'll give you the mic to quickly introduce yourself to the audience.
GM. I suppose I'm a crypto OG. I've been in crypto since 2014, but not really participating in the culture side of it until 2020, when I started to speculate a little bit and learn about the art world through Nifty Gateway. That's where Vasia and I met not long after getting my first piece in my wallet there in late 2020. Since then, I have been a conference maxi and a community builder for meme coin projects like Turbo, helping to build a little bit of the culture and art.
Milton, I'm so sorry. I can't hear you. I lost you midway. Can everyone throw up emojis? Thumbs up if you guys can hear Milton. I don't know if it's me or him with this connection. Okay, thumbs down if you guys could not hear Milton. I'm assuming you guys couldn't hear him. Oh, thumbs down. Okay, great. Milton, I see a lot of thumbs down. Thanks for participating, guys. Okay, let's give him a minute to hopefully rejoin the space. I'm glad it wasn't me because sometimes Twitter likes to rug and then I really can't. Let's try again, Milton. Continue.
Hey, take two. Can you hear me now? All right, I got a thumbs up. So very quickly, I am a crypto OG, I suppose you could call me, since 2014, a Bitcoin maxi once upon a time, only to find crypto art in late 2020 and start speculating and then collecting eventually, getting involved with the culture here in Web3. I have since become a conference maxi and a community builder with projects like the Turbo meme coin project and with Trevor Jones alongside Vasia, and occasionally even with great people like Abrahani at Light Art, and they were doing their interview series. So good to see Abrahani in the building, and a bunch of good friends. Previous interviewees like Skylux are here with me, for example, today. Skylux, what's up? Rob, RD to the moon. I see you, bro. Congratulations on scoring the Masquerade. Looks like you'll be participating in Sam Spratt's new collection. Rebecca Rose is here, who always has a lot to say about rodeo because she's been one of the first experimenteurs over there, going under an alias, which I think is epic. Manic's in the house, who now that we've connected on the space, I see Manic everywhere on the timeline, even though I've been slightly removed as I've been renovating my house this year. But I do see Manic popping up all over my timeline now, which is good. So I'm glad we connected on these spaces. Catalina Uma, who always has great contributions, is here with us as well. Jose Antonio, a religious listener everywhere I go. Love you, Jose. Good to see you here as well. Yet a team member, another member of our great team over at Trevor Jones is with us as well. So is Luquito, one of One Love Art Down, one of the hardest working people in Web3 is here. Vicky J is here, and Eiley, a couple new members that I don't think I've seen before. Glad to have you. Please do us a big favor. As Vasia mentioned, go ahead and retweet, hit that like button in the comments. These are all going to help fill the room up. Let's see if we can get some more awesome faces in the building. But yes, I am excited to start the chat today with you, Vasia. I think this is a great topic, and one I just started to see, and I'm looking for examples, not to call names out, but I'm really eager to see some of these. I know that we had Parrot on a previous show. So if you're with us then, we saw Parrot's experimentation that he did very transparently, I might add, which I thought was smart. It was announced well in advance what he was doing there, but I think we've seen some more under the radar, maybe you call them, or perhaps insidious. Well, today's discussion will determine which adjective we're going to use for those drops on rodeo. But yeah, Vasia, I'll let you jump into it because I know you have some starting points. We want to get everybody caught up on what's happening over there on rodeo.
Yeah, no naming names, Milton. We talked about it. Okay, so for those that are maybe new to the show, I just want to keep you guys updated. So Milton and I essentially select a trending tweet each week that inspires the conversation. Typically, it's something that is not only getting a lot of attention from the community, but it has us a little divided and there's a bit of a debate. So I personally love that because I think it gives us the opportunity to have a healthy conversation and really learn from each other. So we also highly encourage, and usually we have people already requesting, so you're making me nervous, guys, but we always open the stage to anyone that would like to contribute. For those unable to join on and talk, you're more than welcome to drop your comments and thoughts on the thread. I definitely go through those during the space as well. And most importantly, I just again want to remind everyone that in all conversations, we like to keep things respectful and no question, comment, or idea is a silly one. I highly encourage people to come up and share their thoughts. I also want to specifically give a shout out because we've been seeing a lot of speakers that are joining from overseas. And I know English is not everyone's first language, but it hasn't stopped many people from joining the conversation. So I just want to throw some love very quick and say that I just admire all of you that do that. It's I know not easy and also very brave to do that. So I appreciate you guys still making the effort to join the stage and contribute to the conversation. Milton, I'm going to pin the tweet that inspired this week's conversation up top. And as I do that, I want to maybe for those that are living under a rock and are not familiar with rodeo and the craze that's been going on, can you please clarify, tell us a little bit about rodeo and specifically how have creators been using the platform?
All right. Well, if you've been living under a rock, which I have for the last month, but I still know what's going on, you're talking about rodeo, which has been the focus of several spaces now, for good reason, because it's been very popular. We've seen people, famous examples like Jack Butcher, doing very big things over there, for example. And then lots of artists have migrated. If you look at the chart on Dune, you're seeing just explosive growth for them and Kayvon's team. So kudos to them. If you're not aware, Rodeo is they claim to be a social media platform where you can mint for 30 cents an open edition that is open for 24 hours. So I believe this is an attempt to be a bit democratic, where everybody has the same playing field, which is interesting to me. Most people, including Rodeo, explained using this platform to develop the artist's story and build relationships with collectors. I talked about great people like Rebecca, who I still haven't discovered her alias, but she's minting under an alias. I'm still trying to find her, searching through the timeline there. But people doing interesting experimentation over there, I think, is the name of the game, and not necessarily minting their one of ones. Instead, posting work in progress or behind the scenes or other quote unquote low lift work, right? So, a pretty clear distinction between something like super rare and rodeo, in other words. So that's what's taking place. Now we're seeing some new phenomenon pop up, which I'm going to let Vasia get into, and that's where the controversy revolves around a little bit.
So a couple of people have been posting. I pinned up Pixel Pete. He was one that I saw and kind of resonated with, but a lot of people have been posting it. I'm just going to read it out very quick. He wrote, "I'm not here to tell anyone how to share their work, but when I see work on Rodeo that was once minted as a one of one, it quickly breaks the notion of the social contract that I have understood and championed regarding the value and scarcity of tokenized art on the blockchain." So essentially, people are taking previously minted one of one work, and putting it on Rodeo. And the community had a lot to say about it, a lot of heated comments. I'm going to encourage people to join the stage. You guys are more than welcome to join the conversation. Milton, I'm going to throw you the mic first. As a collector that I respect your approach specifically because you've been here through bears and bulls. You've also been to a lot of in-person events, and you specifically emphasize relationship with artists. So tell me, if you had collected a one of one on, let's say, Super Rare, and saw the exact same work minted on Rodeo, what would your initial response be?
I'd be like, what the fuck? For real, I'd be like that meme, the Blink 182 first date music video meme, like, what the fuck? And I had to read up to make sure that was the right reaction, and I stand by it. So that would be my initial reaction, and the reaction that I would have after putting some thought, time, and effort into reading the comments and questions that people have about this. So let me start by saying I read one of the comments that Vasia found from my buddy Andrew Ribbit over, I've known him for years now through the Turbo community. So it's funny that he opined on this. But Andrew basically was having a conversation with Rick Ostenbrook and stating that, hey, we live in this digital art world, and under the hood, a 721, one of one, and an 1155 unnumbered edition is the new normal here. And it's akin to a physical one-on-one and prints. And while I love my boy Andrew, who I've known for years now, I completely disagree with this, considering A, I am not a fan of trying to explain the tech behind my art unless it's interesting. So if it's a transient lab, dynamic piece that changes, let's say with the ocean tides or time of the day, that's cool. I'd love to share that detail with others. The difference between a 721 and an 1155 to strangers or friends? Not so much. So I differ in opinion there with Andrew. I think we're too early for that. B, I agree with many of the critics that I no longer own a one of one. In fact, I own a one of two, or much, much worse, a one of 1,000. Again, you have no control over an open edition for 24 hours. And C, lastly, I would say I agree with Rick's take on this conversation that Andrew and him were having. And he was saying, look, digital duplicates are too similar aesthetically versus, say, a physical oil painting and a physical print. There's just not enough distinction to separate those two mentally or visually. Now, I would end with this. Do I think that artists shouldn't experiment with rodeo and perhaps make spin-offs of some of their popular pieces? No, but distinguish it for God's sakes. Color change is an option that has been thrown around. I think that's fair, pretty simple solution. Or Rick had suggested putting a border around it, but damn, make it different, right? So there's a lot of great artists in the room. I've seen DeSolter. I've collected his work, for example, and his work is different on rodeo. And I just think that's so important because if rodeo does in fact take off, these could be important pieces of work for you artists out there. So I don't want to see anybody make the pitfall. I'll go back to OG, what he said. just don't make any crippling mistakes. Like you can experiment all you want in this space, and please, for God's sake, do it. Experiment, take risks, do new things, try new platforms, but think about it for longer than a 1 month period because these things might be on chain for a long damn time. So that's my take.
Yeah, I don't disagree. I think my initial response was just as strong. I was like, that's crazy. But the more I kind of dug into it and thought about it, I get what they're saying. I never compared it or I never thought about it regarding, okay, a painting versus the prints and merch and other distribution methods and kind of comparing it that way. Um, I don't think I agree with it. I'm just a little less strong on it. I do have a bunch of like follow-up questions, which honestly, I don't know, people. I'm gonna just, if you want to request and join the stage, please do so. There was a couple of specific people that had counter arguments I was hoping would join because I'm curious to pick their brains. But Milton, we'll just bounce the ball until perhaps people join us. But I guess my question to you is, okay, I think rodeo is like risky because it's literally a 24-hour open edition. So you run the risk of people just missing it and it literally being an edition of five or something, which if you're minting it for 30 cents, essentially, the creator's getting that 30-cent kickback, you're devaluating your one of one floor. So I just think it's like super risky. But if it wasn't rodeo, would it make a difference? Like if you could do it on a manifold and again, under the hood, it's technically different because of the smart contracts. Does it make any difference? Like if you're able to then control, I guess, and really control the amount that you're minting. What are your thoughts, Mills?
Yeah, I think we've already seen a little bit of rodeo having a lot of hype and then slowing down. I've noticed it, and personally, I've slowed down because I deposited about $200 in ETH on base that I had lying around, not in meme coins somewhere for once. And after doing that, I said I'm going to experiment here. It is fun, it's addicting, but even myself, I kind of slowed down, and I just noticed that mint numbers seem to be going down. So yeah, I think you're exactly right. Let's say that you mint a piece that's supposed to be like maybe a high numbered open edition, you're expecting to be minted out by a lot of people, and then all of a sudden you have this really low edition piece. Um, these things happen. I don't know. I actually collected a piece from an artist that is a early OG super rare artist. He did an open edition, he was not akin to doing. I think he was just going out on a limb. And I'm not going to name names, but I was the only person to mint this. So now I have a one of one at what's an absolute steal in my mind. But I'm curious. I haven't really had the discussion with the artist. I didn't know if I wanted to even go there because I assume his feelings were probably hurt that nobody minted that out. This was an artist that was a bit bigger back in the day, kind of early super rare days, and maybe popularity has just waned for whatever reason, which I think is going to happen in an artist's career. So no biggie. But yeah, I think you're right. When it's out of your control, these odd things can happen. And I personally, if I was an artist, wouldn't want to have an edition of five or even 10 low number. I don't think anything under 50, maybe even 100, depending on my success in this industry at 30 cents. So yeah,
Do
the
you
control is
Do
tough.
you follow up question to that? Because you just call like it is a one of one technically, but in your head as a collector, is that one of one on rodeo the equivalent of that person's one of one on super rare? Like they're different artworks, but like in value, do you consider it the same? Because technically they're both one of one.
If only one was minted, is that your question? Like
Well, you just
that,
said you minted a one of his on rodeo, so you're the only.
not on. This was just an open edition on a separate platform. I believe this was a manifold
Got
open
it, got
edition.
it, got
Yeah,
it.
but it wasn't terribly different at the end of the day. It was different priced for sure. It was about 50 USD. And it was, I believe it was 24 hours open edition, something of that nature. They usually don't last too long. Um, but to your question, like hypothetically, would that be a one of one? I mean, it would. It's a weird dynamic. It's your first instinct is to say as a collector, like, holy shit, I just got a one in one for 30 cents. That's amazing. But then you have to study that a little bit and say, well, wait a second. Like there was no demand for more people to mint this at 30 cents. Like, I don't know, how valuable is that one in one? That's kind of a warning sign then after you think about it. So it's a tough dynamic. And again, I think you're right. The loss of control. with an open edition is really, really tough. We've seen this. We know firsthand speaking to some of our closest artists, and we can name names here because he tells the story publicly. But Trevor Jones, for example, when he minted the Bitcoin Angel, he had zero clue. He was expecting somewhere between 400 and 800 mints on a great, great day, and he minted almost 4,200. And that was at the same time exhilarating and completely scared shitless. Trevor was worried that he might have ruined his career. So these dynamics with the open editions are really, really tough. They are at the whim of the collectors. It's a tough call.
I'm going to ask a quick hypothetical because I know Rick Oostenbrück has been posting a lot on Rodeo and just he's very vocal about he likes the platform. So let's say Rick minted a piece and his pieces are a little bit different, the ones that he's been releasing on Rodeo. He is taking more of the work in progress approach or it's not the same as his, let's say, super rare pieces. If on, let's say, a crazy day, nobody saw it and literally only one person minted one of his Rodeo posts, it's technically a one of one. Is that the same value as the other one of ones that he has? What's your take on that? And Papa Bearded, thank you for joining the stage. I know you're here. Feel free to jump in if you have any comments to the convo.
Papa Bearded, go ahead if you want to chime in on that. But again, it's this weird gray area. I just feel like, again, first glance, you're like, holy shit, I just scored a 1-1 for 30 cents. But then what does that say about the collecting dynamic at large? That nobody was paying attention. Why was nobody paying attention? Does nobody like this artist anymore? What's the deal? Something went
I guess
terribly wrong there.
Forget how much you minted it for. Take that out of the equation as well. Just saying, I minted this one of one on Rodeo, and I minted that one of one is on Super Rare. Are they now close in value? Can you sort of compare them? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I get you. Okay, so taking the value of mint out, I think that no, at the end of the day, 99% of the artists that I see and doing what I consider rodeo right are creating something that's visually distinguished. Like Rick Ostenbruck's, his pieces are nice. They're gorgeous, don't get me wrong. And they're still pretty sharp in my mind, but there's something lacking there. There's a finishing touch. You can sense the fact that Rick didn't spend as much time on this piece, and I think that's where, in my mind, I have to make that visual distinction. And so I think that people like I mentioned earlier, but DeSalter, for example, he's got these glitch pieces on there. His animation is recognizable on the timeline. Those glitch pieces, he does glitchy stuff, but this is like pure glitch without any visible characters in it. For example, his purple drink, orange drink, yellow drink, lime drink. I love those pieces. But these are not what I see DeSalter doing on a day-by-day basis, and not his one-on-one or even small edition work. So I'm cool with that. So yeah, so the answer is no. I think it's going to be seen as a fluke. I don't think the value is going to be the same as the 721 that was listed on Super Rare. There might even be the provenance discussion that you could have, because could anything ever have as much value on Rodeo as a Super Rare? There's some platform cachet that I'm thinking about as well. So I think all these are factors, but I know Papa Beard has got his hand raised, and thank you for being the first on stage. Normally we have 1,000 requests, so hopefully that trend continues. And I think Jennifer Pepin is here as well. Good to see you, Jennifer. But Papa Bearded was first on stage, so we'll let Papa chime in.
Yeah, I mean, I love the conversation, and I think the thing you were just getting at the end, some platform cachet, as you say, resonates for sure. But there's also the question about resaleability, honestly, with a market like Rodeo. If you happen to get in early on an artist, or you get a fluke and you get one of these low editions with such a kind of vibrant built-in secondary marketplace, you may have actual higher resellability than something that did on Super Rare. That's just my 2 cents. But I think it's also totally appropriate for people to be putting something out there that is more promotional or is a less finished piece. Again, I'm finding it an amazing platform to make connections, to put out interim steps on pieces that I have elsewhere. So they don't show up in full in a final piece somewhere else, but they're part of my process, and they're still visually appealing, and they would otherwise sit on a hard drive. So I remain hooked. I remain kind of getting right around those, 50, 50 minutes a day on a daily rodeo piece, and that's pretty good for me. I haven't been super into the ETH space since the early 2021 days, so I'm happy for that. I also take a page out of the Zach Lips book, and I do collect a good proportion of my own pieces because I do think they'll have value later, and I do want to be able to offer those to collectors of mine who weren't so eager or quick to join rodeo.
Hey, Papa Bearded, congrats, by the way, and welcome, back to being active in the space. I've just like taken my first hiatus and it's kind of refreshing, but I'm glad to see that you're back active, and I'm glad to see that you're satisfied with that number of mints. I think that's cool. I think you're being very level-headed about it and finding, I think 50 mints on rodeo is pretty damn good, to be honest with you. So, I applaud your effort and your success. And yeah, I would speak to your response there just briefly on resaleability. Reselling on rodeo, and I did make this a very strong point because the last art quote unquote bull run, my sell button broke. I like to joke, and I didn't sell hardly anything, maybe 5% of my collection, and I have hundreds of pieces. And I kind of wish I had taken a few more profits because I didn't know exactly what I was buying at the time. I wasn't quite as invested in the space as I am now studying it. But it is pretty hard to resell. You really have to be, not only at your computer, but when you get the offer, you have to be quick on the draw because everybody who collected that is receiving the same notification simultaneously. And between my MetaMask and my wallet guard, it's typically 3 clicks before I can try and capture that 5x, right? I will say there's a counterpoint to that where Jack had his collection of 27 pieces, Jack Butcher, of course. And I did hear through the grapevine, primarily through Roger Dickerman, that on secondary, nobody was accepting the 5x, 10x, 50x, 100x, 1000x. And you can search these contracts. That doesn't happen often, but that there is some secondary happening on places like OpenSea, for example. And the lowest price that just sold recently for that first piece, an open edition at 30 cents on rodeo, if you were sharp enough to catch Jack's first drop there, they're selling for 0.6 ETH. Obviously, that's the one extreme, but maybe something to aspire to if you're hoping to be commercially successful in this industry one day. But yeah, I do like, also, lastly, I'll speak on what you said about collecting your own supply. I think that's really smart. It kind of reminds me of like meme coin devs keeping a little bit of their own supply. So I think that's kind of a cool dynamic taking place. I do see artists, when I look at the collectors, collecting their own art, and I think that's a smart way to have some in the vault, potentially make a little money on flips if that's your game, but just have some in your control over time. I think that's a really smart idea. So great job on that.
Well, and it's got the added benefit, if you go through the people who have collected from you, it's a nice way to give back to the people who've collected because of the 25% is built in right there.
Milton, real quick.
Yeah. Good call.
Sorry, you mentioned OpenSea, and I wanted to circle back to that point you made. You mentioned obviously like people minting on Rodeo versus minting on a platform like Super, like just the platforms themselves hold different value, might mean something different to collectors. But if you're on OpenSea, can you really tell where it was minted? Like, is it easy to differentiate if you're using a platform like OpenSea? And I think that's kind of, for me, again, if it's like a one of one that happened to be minted on Rodeo and a one of one that was minted on Super, and you're sitting there on, like, let's say OpenSea, is it easy to tell? Or do you have to do a lot of digging in order to be able to, I guess, differentiate and then decide if one holds more value?
I think I can speak on this pretty well because if I'm not mistaken, Kayvon was on the show explaining exactly this. So you recall the long space that we had, where people had lots of questions. One of the questions was about artists who want to dig in deeper and have a little more control, a little more say over kind of the buttons, that they can press to change these, to manipulate them. We were talking about OpenSea, And I believe the default is that it comes under Rodeo posts. So I think the first piece that I collected on Rodeo was a Jeremy Booth piece. And I was doing that little sleuthing. I was taking the contract address, I was searching OpenSea, and it looks like Rodeo posts is the title that comes up, though Kayvon said you can actually modify that. You can go in, I don't know if it's under OpenSea or if it's actually within Rodeo. I believe it was OpenSea, but I think under OpenSea you can change that. So I imagine you could obfuscate that as an artist, especially over time. Kayvon had also alluded to adding more features. And my guess is you're going to have a little bit more to play with at the control center as an artist in the future. So you may or may not, though, if you click on the details, you should be able to see that that is, in fact, an 1155 versus a 721. That goes back to the technicality aspect. We're going to do that in our community. Our outsiders or new collectors going to do that? Not likely.
Speak for yourself, Milton, because there's no shot that I'm going to be doing that kind of tech digging around. So this is why I guess I have such an issue with minting the same artwork like this, because I'm not going to do digging. And I think I always bring it back to onboarding and normies and how do we reach the masses. And I think one of the biggest problems is when you are trying to explain to someone that knows nothing about the tech, this type of distribution is very confusing, and being able to explain again the smart contracts, like you mentioned, and the differences, I think it's very technical. So maybe down the line, if people start learning more and they start learning what's beneath the hood, maybe we'll be seeing more of this type of distribution, but I'm not for it for this specific reason. Jennifer, I wanted to quickly just say hi and thank you for joining the stage. I know, I'm sure you're opinionated and have a few comments. So what's your initial take on the overall subject?
So that it's actually quite complicated because I myself have evolved in my position on this. So at some point, I was just like, the social contract and provenance, and you mint it anywhere as a one of one, and that's it. And then, I don't know, maybe like 6 months ago, when people were starting really to sort of learn more about Bitcoin and things of this nature, a gentleman came on to a space and was like, well, I'm going to do one of one on Bitcoin inscription, and I'm going to do it on ETH. And I'm actually going to gamify it where if you collect the one of one on BTC and you collect the one of one on ETH, I then am going to send you like an original. And I was like, huh. And I went and I sat with that. And then I started thinking about it. And I was like, well, I mean, there's originals in museums, and then there's AP prints, and then there's prints. And then in the gift shop, they have all kinds of merchandise with that same exact image. So maybe it's something like that. And I think that when we explain it to people, it's not just what platform it's on. I think what blockchain it's on also makes a difference. And I think that we have sort of established a social contract here, and you all can correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that I sort of feel it or see it is that BTC is sort of like gold. And then adjacent to that is ETH layer 1. And then sort of down that totem pole would then be something like a base or a Solana. And then further down that totem pole would be like a Polygon or things of this nature. And so that's the way that I've been just sort of reading it and feeling it. And then I also think that if you're able to provide nuance, and I think Milton hit on this, that's when you can more easily differentiate it. So I probably upset Papa because I said Solana somewhere in the middle. My bad, fam. So sorry. But what I was thinking about was, for myself, I made an art piece during Miami Art Week. I hadn't minted it yet. But the gentleman who approached me at the gallery was like, I really love this. I want that one. I want this custom version of it and this, that, and the third. And I was like, all right, cool. Well, this is important. It's an important moment for me. So I sat with it. I spoke with my mentor, Sarkis, and he was like, listen, I'm an ETH maxi, and I know that you're probably going to think that I'm coming at it super biased, but if this is something truly important to you, I'm going to recommend that you put it on ETH Layer 1 or Bitcoin. It's highly animated. It's one of your best animated pieces to date. Do it that way so that your collector understands the gravitas and understands that what he's paying for, he's really getting. And I was like, all right, cool. So I followed his advice. I did that for all 3 pieces. They all sold. And then I thought to myself, well, I still technically as an artist have the rights over this image. What if I want to make a ticket for NFT NYC? But clearly you can see that the image is static, it's not moving, and you can see that there's lines through it and that they superimposed the Marriott marquee and the date and all of this stuff. And just visibly, you can tell that it's a ticket and it's on Polygon when you go onto the NFT NYC website. So that's how I particularly thought of it. Like me, I sat with it some time and I just went forward with it because I do feel that we do have that flexibility as artists. And it's something that's already existing in the trad world. Like I said, there's originals, there's even replicas that go for insane amounts of money. Then there's AP prints that are numbered. And so I think we're kind of getting into that sort of conversation here. And how do we sort of tier it and still do it in an ethical way? I do think, though, that if it's like literally the exact same thing, like no variation, nothing whatsoever, and you're putting it on, let's say, ETH Layer 1 and selling it on Super Rare for $1,000, I do think there is a breach in the social contract if you then go and take that exact same thing and sell it on Rodeo for $100. And so I think it's sort of like how you approach it, but I think that it's definitely possible so long as you're doing right by your collector base.
Yeah, Jennifer, thank you so much for sharing and such an interesting take. I specifically love the context. I think the context is crucial and very important. The original example you mentioned, the gentleman that released on Bitcoin and then Ethereum, and he told everyone what the game plan was. And so collectors were aware and they had the choice and the option to participate or not. And so if they didn't feel comfortable or it wasn't their vibe, they didn't have to collect. I do agree with what you just said at the end there. If you mint it and then you decide to turn around afterwards and remint somewhere else, this is where it gets a little shady and uncomfortable. Even if there's good intentions, it's just not a good look, especially when you're not communicating to collectors. So yeah, thank you for sharing. And I definitely understand what you're saying with what chain it's minted on as well, and kind of the different hierarchies of each of them. I did see hands go up, so I'll swing the mic to Stephen, who hasn't spoken yet. Stephen, thanks for joining. What's your take on this?
Yeah, GM Vasia. Hey, HardArt. Wanted to toss one little thought into the mix here, just because I think it is interesting that we're starting to see this become a little bit more prevalent in this moment. But being somebody who monitors both Ethereum L1, number of L2s, and Bitcoin in particular, I think we've seen a lot of that core concept of like, okay, this is a one-of-one work, but then you can also create prints from that work on the same chain. Um, is It's been basically accepted at this point. What isn't accepted and what I do take issue with is when artists are not transparent about that. That to me is the much bigger issue here. And like, again, collectors also need to do their diligence on what it is that they're even collecting. If I'm going to start hearing that there are more collectors out there that are pissed off to see that something is made into a print or a digital print, and they're not doing the research because they're not realizing that they're not buying a one-of-one work, that's more on them for not doing the research, but it's also on the artist for not advertising it as such. We need to make sure that that transparency is there, and if it's not there, that's going to ultimately create a bigger problem in the long run. So if you are an artist in the audience and you're paying attention to that, like just make sure your comms are right. Comms are one of the things in the space that just get totally downplayed and not thought about nearly enough. So consider how you're communicating, consider not just what you're saying, but how it's being received. And most of the time, your collectors won't run into that problem. So I just wanted to put that out there to you guys.
And follow-up question, Stephen, can I just ask, what do you recommend? Like, how do you recommend artists communicate that? What's a good way to do so?
So I've been experimenting a little bit with this lately, and I've been trying to figure out the right methods for attestation because I think that that's really the key here. And it depends from chain to chain, unfortunately. So, like for the moment, I think that making use of stuff like atomic lore, which is an on-chain tool that the team at Atomic Form came up with, is a really great way to start like the ball rolling and making sure that there's like an actual on-chain representation of the hierarchy of a work. So like if you're going to have a one of one within that collection, and then there's going to also be additions, you can denote and attest that fully on chain using atomic lore. But then over in like the Bitcoin ecosystem, for example, where you don't yet have it, I'm under the impression that they're going to be moving that forward here soon. But for the moment, because there isn't an atomic lore, a place where like you can really have that attestation on chain, I've been more of the mind that like if you're inscribing art on Bitcoin, you should have within your parent-child hierarchy, which again, for a lot of people in here, you won't understand what that means. If you want to understand what I'm talking about, you should go like look up what parent-child inscription is on Bitcoin. That'll set it up for you. But with parent-child hierarchies, I'm starting to become more of the mind that you need to have an actual like curatorial statement or your like formal documentation behind a collection inscribed within your parent-child tree, right? So if the parent is the collection name, the children are all the pieces that exist within that collection. But alongside that, there would be a documentation inscription of its own that is strictly a reference point or a second parent to the collection that lays out that context in full detail. We've seen it done a couple of times with like just HTML scripts that are inscribed, and it's done pretty damn well for like making sure that everybody's on the same page and can tell what is legit, what is official, what is the actual plan. So I would challenge it from that perspective.
Thank you, Stephen. And one last follow-up question. I don't know, it's not specific for you, but if anyone happens to know, like, is there any tool to regulate this type of stuff? I believe there was back in 2021. But in terms of like, let's say I go and I mint a piece on Super Rare and then I'm minting it on Tezos or what, or even honestly, someone might take it and mint it somewhere else and it's not even to my knowledge. Are there any tools that can kind of check all chains and police the different minting and kind of notify people? Does that exist? Does anyone?
It's kind of platform specific. I mean, in your example, for instance, if you're minting something on another chain and then you go and mint the same piece on object, they'll flag your profile for having violated terms of service. So you need to, like Steven's saying, you need to be aware about your communications on it. And by the same example, if you put in the description of both pieces that you're doing this experiment, then you're okay and they won't flag you. But it's still definitely a loaded topic or we wouldn't be talking about it.
Yeah, speaking of experiment, I'm going to pin a tweet up top that Parrot, for those that are familiar, he actually minted a one of one on Super Rare, and then he also did it on Rodeo just to experiment. But what I appreciate from him is he made it very clear, he communicated, and he told everyone this is a social experiment. So it was more of just seeing where collectors gravitated toward, and he does make the argument that this is like Prince, essentially. Jennifer, I did see a hand up. I think you maybe had a response to Stephen, so I'll let you go ahead.
Yeah, just a sort of an anecdote and experience myself of I don't have a lot of art on Bitcoin at all, but when I was onboarded by Gamma and Xverse for the Latim 10x 10 by 10 drop, it was 10 editions by 10 artists. Like we literally did the whole entire onboarding process, but because most of us were completely brand new to being on Bitcoin, it was more of just like the essentials. You do this, this is the step, this, that. And I remember at some point, like grasping loosely the concept that this was going to be like a one of one. And then from that, 10 editions were going to be made. But I still didn't sort of get it until I saw the page where people could go and scribe. And I saw that there were 10 editions and it was the static version of the artwork. There was only one version of the artwork. There were no variations. And then once that sort of got out the way and people inscribed and got the supply of the editions, then we were sort of suggested to push the one of one. And I remember having like difficulty because I'm like, but like, how do I do this if it's the exact same image? Like, there's nothing different about it. And like having to ask these questions and having them explain to me the whole concept of like parent child and all of that. So, like, that's me, an artist that's been in this space for 3 years. I can only imagine, like Vasia said, how do you explain that to a collector? And yes, yes, I went back in the description of the one of one. Clearly, it says in the description one of one. And then the ones that are additions are part of a header that says 10x10. So, sure, people can understand it, but still, like, something about it just felt a little off to me because I was so not accustomed to it. So, I just think that education is going to be like really critical, not just for people who are new to the space, but people who are already in the space, so that we, like Stephen said, have the proper communication skills to even articulate to potential collectors and avoid what could be some kind of like a friction point with somebody where they're like, oh, but I got that from you as an addition, and so got it for you as a one of one. And so I just really think that more communication all around, even with the platforms and the people who are bringing in artists to do these kinds of activities and projects and drops, I think would really go a very long way.
Is it worth?
Yeah. Go
Oh,
ahead.
sorry.
Sorry,
I
Papa
was just gonna
Bearded.
say, is this a worthy caveat that like inscriptions for on-chain art is a slightly different category than simply minting the same art piece on multiple chains?
Oh, 100%. I just was, sharing that experience with Bitcoin because, as a person who only minted on ETH and Tezos and Solana for a very long time, like, it just was a totally different concept for me to wrap my brain around.
Yeah, and that's all.
And I actually think it's a
Sorry.
great example. No, I'm glad. No. I'm glad you brought that up because I think it's a great example because even for myself, who I'm very active in the space, etc., but it's still a little foreign. And I think it's just like the conversations that are being had, we're light years ahead. Like we're still wrapping, I think, our heads around the concept of the value of digital ownership and digital artwork in general. So again, I think these conversations are happening, are important. We should be having it because there's obviously people at the forefront of building in this direction. But at the same time, when we're talking about the normalized behavior and all this, I think it's just like we're too early. It's almost like the metaverse. Like everyone was jumping into metaverse and this and that. And it's like, wait, if we're trying to onboard the masses, like let's bridge the digital and physical first to get them to understand the digital, and then we'll bring them into the metaverse. Like I just feel like these types of conversations are important, but it's too far in advance, if that makes sense. So, Papa Bearded, I didn't mean to cut you off. I don't know if you had a follow-up comment to what Jennifer just said as well, but Mike is
you
yours.
never have to apologize. You do such a good job sharing the mic here. I mean, I was just going to say, like, we are so early because we don't have like the be all end all aggregator, platform where we're seeing everybody's work across chains. Like, I'm sorry, OpenSea is not it. Not going to cut it. And eventually, Jenny's argument that, there's a hierarchy of chains, that might prove false. You look at the momentum right now, everything may not be pointing towards Ethereum being the place that is your, your hierarchy, and it may be more of an archive of where you put art. Just saying, from total blockchain, we're just so early. So it's hard to make that call as an artist right now to say, this art deserves, quote unquote, this specific blockchain, when we don't even have the marketplaces that we're going to have 5 years from now.
This is true. I don't disagree. I think it's very interesting to be able to, and again, why the conversations are recorded. I would love to listen and see where we're going to be in not even a year, in a couple of months, and obviously down the line. But this is definitely the Wild West. Let's put it that way. Stephen, I see you patiently waiting with the hand up. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, so I wanted to respond to one thing and then add a different comment to the mix. For Jennifer, what you were mentioning about like Gamma with originals, which is their one of one terminology, versus prints, which is their additions methodology. It's important to understand, and like wherever you are, right, whichever chain, you need to be willing and curious enough to go through the process of evaluating infrastructure and understanding the terminology of the ecosystem, like where you are. I know that when I was initially getting onto Ethereum back in, God, so many freaking years ago, it took me an uphill battle to like understand, okay, like what's the difference between ERC 721 and ERC 1155, right? Like that, it takes time. So with a brand new nascent ecosystem like Bitcoin, the reason why again, like I encourage it to be both a artist and a collector discussion here is because for me as a collector, I don't want to collect prints. There are plenty of people that love it, right? There are plenty of people that love it. But I personally don't find a lot of value in just collecting prints. Some people do. When you look at like again, different chains that are trying to evaluate it from that perspective, we're going to eventually move to a point, at least in my view, where certain aspects of the chain are abstracted, meaning that to um, to Papa's point, like we may get to the point where we're no longer talking about exactly like what chain it's on, right? We may just be getting to the point where we are collecting art and we know that it's on chain and hopefully not on IPFS or Tezos, but that's just my own thing. Uh, just kidding. The
Shade.
Sorry, the shade comes from my own show. I have a brand for deliberately ripping on Tezos occasionally. I try not to bring it into other people's spaces, but here we are. The
All good, all good.
the bigger point that I think is important here is like while abstraction is one potential future that we have, it doesn't mean that in the present there's not something you can do. And that's something that's really hard for people to wrap their heads around because all the time I hear people say, oh, it's not built yet. We need the builders to come in and do X, Y, and Z. I'm sorry, but like not everything needs to be built in a Web3 sense for you to actually have transparent communication and understanding of like what your entire portfolio looks like if you're an artist. Like there's a reason why the artist's website has been a thing for multiple decades now, right? And on those sites, if you are a Web3 artist, you should be like properly indicating your own within your portfolio what is a print, what like use your own lexicon, right? If you want to call it a print, great. You want to call it an edition, great. But if it's going to be one of one artwork, denote that, point to it, right? Just add a link in that points to the one of one as compared to the edition. It's not it doesn't need to be rocket science in that regard. Do I like what Gamma did to your point, Jennifer, with originals being a point that effectively the print is pointing back to? I don't know. Like, to me, the verdict is kind of out on that. I think that over time, people are going to find different ways of doing it. But to Gamma's credit, they found a really effective way of doing it that manages the cost for an artist. That's the thing that I will give them credit all day long for. Is they managed to find a way to mitigate the cost of having to continually reinscribe and put that cost on the artist for creating their own work on chain. That sucked for a very long time before that. So I would encourage people to just look into the terminology, but also don't sit around and wait for somebody else to build a solution for attestation or on-chain checking for what is where and what is, legitimately of one artist's creation. Because there are going to be times where you see a work that's put on-chain on Ethereum, thrown onto a different chain, and that artist didn't do it, right? That's deeply problematic, but that's the exact reason why I'm saying like you should still rely on and make use of like your actual artist website, have the portfolio page and have those pointers up. It's crucial.
Yeah, I'm definitely a big advocate for the artist websites. I think it's just also the easiest way for people to navigate and get to know you and all of that. Like, I don't believe in depending on X or Instagram or whatever to be able to link trees, etc. Like, I think it just, if you really want to present your work, you really want to, I don't want to use the word sell, but at the end of the day, if you really want to, sell yourself and create that connection with people, I think the website is so crucial. Janine, I just wanted to say hi. Thank you so much for joining. I did see your hand go up. Did you want to comment back to Stephen or share your thoughts?
Hi. I've only heard bits and pieces of the conversation, but I heard most of what Stephen and Jennifer said. Um, I was saying to you in a comment that I was just talking about this. I talk about this a lot because I initially come from physical art and design background, and I've talked to a lot of curators, I've talked to collectors, I've talked to gallerists, and I know a lot of people in the Web3 space poo-poo a lot of that world. But as we've seen in the last few years, more and more it's becoming one world. And that is hopefully the goal for most artists, is to be able to cross over in both worlds. And there are some protocol and things that I do think after many, many years, the more quote unquote traditional art world has set, that we all could learn from. There is only one of one. Anyone that thinks that they could take their one of one and put it on rodeo has just completely diminished uh, their collector. And if I was a collector that collected somebody's one of one and then saw that, I would never want to collect from them again. And they wouldn't have a lot of validity to me. And but we are also in an advantage of being able very easily in the digital world to do some kind of variation of our work, so that there still is only one of one, because we still own the rights. I can put my art on a mug, on a t-shirt, on a billboard, a digital billboard. I can do a lot of things with it. But in terms of what someone can collect, you really have to prioritize and break it down into levels of what people can collect. And I think it is the same exact thing, whether it's Web3 or physical, or it crosses over. And anyone that's doubting that is, I think, yes, we've seen, I mean, I've been in this space for 3-4 years, and it is the Wild West, but we've also seen what we probably didn't think we'd see, which is how much of a crossover there is. I go to the LA Art Show now, and the first time I was in it as an NFT artist, and the booth that we were in was booth that had NFTs and digital art. Now it's everywhere. Jenny's working on all these things with hotels and other things where they want digital displays, and so those collectors have to have the same. There's the collectors, a lot of them who may have in the past only collected traditional art, are starting to be more and more interested. How can I bring this into my home? And so you have to provide the value. I'm really into legacy also, right? What's it going to be like for them to pass this on to the next generation, to be those early collectors of the valuable art versus the editions? And there's nothing wrong with editions, and there's nothing wrong with open editions, and there's nothing wrong with variations of it. But I feel really strongly that you have to value your work and the quality of what the original is. So that's my thoughts on this.
No, thank you for sharing. And I'm with you. And I'm actually a perfect timing because you mentioned the word variation. And I wanted to actually ask everyone listening, because Milton also mentioned like the color variations or the hue kind of changes. And this was being brought up in a couple of comments I was reading this week. So essentially my question is, so if I minted, let's say one of one on Super Rare, and I'm now changing the color variation and I'm posting it, and I'm like, let's say I just make the whole thing one color, monochromatic, and I'm posting it now on Rodeo. Is this okay? Is this a variation where it's like it's okay to distribute? Is this something that I need to disclose in advance? Like, what are people's thoughts on the variation game? Anyone can kind of jump in and answer. Not all at once, guys,
I'm going to
please.
jump in for a sec. So I think anything is good as long as you do exactly what you said. And I'll go back. I'm going traditional here, sorry, but that's where I'm going because I think it's easier to explain. If I'm Picasso, imagine if Picasso or Warhol were living right now. And by the way, Warhol with his silk screens, who someone else usually silk screen for him, probably none of those were exactly the same, but they were also signed limited editions. A Picasso, an original Picasso, is an original Picasso. If I'm Picasso living in this day and age and want to get into NFTs, right, I would probably scan or photograph my piece, do a digital version of it, and maybe I add a little red outline. It is no longer the same as the original that only one person can have. So I think, yes, you can colorize it, you can add something, you can add a layer, you can animate it, you could do a lot of things. It's not that hard. but do something.
I see some other hands. Julia, you actually haven't spoken today. What's going on, girl? I'll let you answer next. How are you?
Hey, I'm so good. I like this conversation. I guess my opinion on variations is I do like the idea of artists that a piece, you know how we're always like, a piece has to be finished? But I like the idea that you can keep experimenting. But I think, like, in regards to collectors, there needs to be a balance. So, like, if you are making a lot of variations, I think it's good to think about your collectors and how that's going to affect them, and maybe like find a balanced price. That's not, for me, I'd probably price it a little, like, but that's just me. Maybe I'm not in the full abundance because I feel like there's like duplicates or whatever. Higher through time or whatever, and let the market know it's worth, or like, or just see. But seeing stuff kind of like one-on-ones and then stuff on Rodeo, I don't get that via like market and pricing. It doesn't really make sense to me for stuff like that, you know, that can maybe elevate your one-of-ones in a way, but isn't a one-of-one. But I have to go back to the deli simulation now.
Okay. Thank you for joining, Julia. Always a pleasure hearing from you. I guess a follow-up to what Julia just said, if you are releasing this color variation, let's say, do you have to disclose to the original collector? Like, do you think you should kind of mention it before you go mint it and then they see it? Like, is that something etiquette, or I don't know, is it just me? Like, to be honest, I think I would kind of want the heads up of like, hey, I'm releasing this. It's based off of the original one-of-one you collected. Just a heads up, blah, blah, blah. Am I the only one?
No,
Go
you're
ahead, Jennifer.
you're definitely not. I think bare minimum, like just something in the description would be good. And yeah, I mean, if you think that your collector might feel a particular way about it, and this is again, like there has to be some kind of open line communication with your collector. How well do you know your collector? Do they only buy exclusively one-of-ones? I think, yeah, in that situation, you should do the right thing and just shoot them a quick DM or a message or something like that and just let them know. But I do think that just a simple little thing, it could be something like pencil drawing of the painting, or negative colorway of the original one-of-one, like just something like that. And it could be fun even. It doesn't have to be like, like that. But I was actually thinking of how One Love handles their drip channel. We have a community drip channel, and actually this week's drop, the person who's dropping, she put basically the exact same artwork, but in 4 different levels, right? So the watercolor, like the complete finished version of the artwork, is the ultimate, and then like the straight up black and white pencil drawing is the common, and then in between that she sort of did like a play, like an overlay of color, but it's not watercolor, it's like digitally imposed onto the pencil. And so she kind of brought it up from like common to rare to legendary to ultimate, and I think visually it's super clear in the set what is what. You feel me? I think again, like where I would have an issue, like Janine said, as a collector, is like if I'm seeing the exact same thing and there's literally not even so much as an effort to put like in the description line something of information where I know that a version of this exists somewhere else. I think that's how I would approach it.
Yeah, and I think what's crucial in that example, Jennifer, is that they're being released at the same time. So people are also able to compare. And of course, okay, you mentioned like she had a legendary and quote unquote higher and lower tiers. But as a collector, you might just gravitate toward one specifically. Like maybe I like the variation more than I like the original. So I would kind of want, I think, that in advance. And when people started talking about the variations on the different threads and comments, I honestly immediately thought of Trevor Jones, and second time is coming up, I guess, Milton. We're definitely fans. But Trevor did a collab with Ice Cube, and he had, I forget the edition size, but it was the gold, bronze, platinum, whatever they was called. And so there was variations of the artwork all being released at once. Collectors obviously got to gravitate toward which ones they they kind of wanted. And he also had something similar where it was a bit more of a tiered system. Had it not been released at the same time, I think it would have been a different conversation. So I guess what we keep coming back to is the importance of transparency and being very open with the intention and with how it's being released. Pop, I see your hand up. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and apologies. I can't see who else are speakers or who has their hands up. So if I end up speaking over someone, apologies in advance.
Not at all. You're totally
Yeah.
good. Thank you, though.
Yeah, and I think, we're talking about derivatives, and I think if it's a substantial derivation of the original work, honestly, as a collector, I'm excited that you're revisiting your work and you're bringing new life to it. Like, can you imagine like having a one of one and then someone making a substantial, derivative of it that they point back to? It gives new life to the piece, and it introduces the work to a whole wider collector base, which I think adds value.
Very true. Very true. Go ahead, Milton.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, I'm all for repurposing a piece. Like, make it however many ways you possibly can. There's an art to selling the same art over again, as long as you make a little tweak to it. I mean, we're part of the fan club over here, but Vasia, there's so many forms that the Bitcoin Angel took. Most recently, it was a cast bronze sculpture. But that's the piece from 2018 that sold as an animated one of one on Super Rare. And then it took 5, 10 different forms in between. So I'm all for it. I think the consensus today has been, do make a distinction and do make it clear. I like Steven's point. Comms are super important, and we don't need futuristic tools that builders have to come in, something magical to go old school and simply state it somewhere, somehow. Either that's in the description or it could simply be on an artist's website. So I think that's very practical advice. I see Janine's got her hand raised. Janine, love to have you chime back in.
So on this side of things, in terms of making variations of your art, number one, we don't always know our collectors. So although if you do know them, it's nice to share whatever you want to. But I think that's where artists do have the power to make these variations and be creative and do different things and, expand their property, right? What they have, their brand, and do different things. So um, I just get really passionate about what is the original and the one of one, and that both on the collector side and the artist side, you have to really value that and not think about what chain it's on as much. And like, I think it was Stephen, I don't know you, hi Stephen, but who was saying like, we don't know what the future is. And if you look back in history and the possible, forward of where your art may be and where it is, you want to know that you've sort of kept that pure, original beauty of the piece you create.
That's a great point that you mentioned, Janine, especially the fact that not all artists are connected to the collectors. And I know certain platforms like the Nifty Gateways and stuff, like they didn't give you the collector's email. So if the collector wasn't on X or didn't have their account connected or had a different name, like there really isn't a great model to communicate. And I think that was a huge problem and still continues to be. I did want to quickly ask you, Janine, what are your personal thoughts on if an artist, especially because you lean more toward the traditional art world, if you are creating these variations and derivatives, is that something that an artist, in your opinion, needs to disclose to the original one of one collector first? Or let's say down the line, it wasn't even an intention, but it's just so happens that they want to then do a variation down the line. Is that okay?
I think it goes back to what I said. If you have a relationship with the collector and want to keep them in the loop of what's happening, sure, but I don't think it's a must because we do retain the rights unless you've given up the rights. Okay. So back in my days of being a creative director, you could do a buyout of a photograph, for instance, if you wanted to, and then it's different, but we're not talking about that here. So if a collector collects your one of one, they have that. That's it. No one else gets it. But what you do with it, I think is okay. But then also keep in mind as the levels happen. So let's say then you do an edition of 10 and it's a different colorway. Then you have to stop doing that one because that's an edition of 10. And now I collected one of 10. right? So people have to keep track of what they're doing, which I found kind of interesting as I got more and more into this space. I have a spreadsheet. Now we have ChatGPT can help you. People should do that. There are reasons there's these back end art things all the time for people, because you can track, where your things are the best you can. But even if you don't know that far, sorry about my dog. She hates when I talk in these spaces. It's really funny. So I think it's the levels. So yes, if you have a relationship, it's always good to keep your collector in the loop. It makes them happy. But if you don't, or you don't know who they are, or you sold it through a gallery, you have no idea who it is, then you have permission. If you've done your contracts right and you've retained your rights to do things in variations, then I think you just move forward. Make more art, make more money, put it out there in the world, create your legacy.
Yeah, I very much agree. I don't think all of the collectors would respond. I feel like Web3 is so interesting because I feel like sometimes the expectations are a little, I don't want to say out of whack, but they're just not in sync, so to speak. Especially, I'm just thinking of 2021 and specific experiences, but when collectors especially were going in and they were spending a lot on a one of one, I feel like they would have a very strong reaction. And I think it just comes down to um, us navigating this new uncharted kind of territory and what is okay and what's not. There is obviously the contract, there is like the fine print, if you will, and not everyone cares to look at it or dive deep, or is it even being explicitly spoken about? Even in terms of displaying, I remember at Crypt Gallery, right, when we first opened in LA, like there was a collector who gave us permission to exhibit a piece, and we're just showcasing it in a hotel lobby, like it's bringing exposure to the artist, etc. And the artist hit us all up and was not happy. And it became a whole conversation around, well, technically, who do we need to ask for permission? And it sparks this. And I mean, it's very interesting. So I feel like a lot of the conversations now, I agree with you. If you have the contact information for the collector, it is just a nice courtesy to pretty much let them know these types of things. But technically, yeah, artists have the right and the ownership. Jennifer, I know you have a hand up. Go ahead.
It's funny you mentioned that, because what I was going to sort of ask you all is, how do you feel about display? Because there is the reality that there are other things that exist in the market, such as Black Dove, for example, where to me, I think of it as a positive, because it gives artists a digital license to do basically what you would do if you were putting your art as a print, or if you were selling it on a mug or what have you, right? Like, you have the ability to license out your art to a brand or something like that. But they're doing it in a different context, which is that they have this application that you could download on a TV, and consumers can then rent your art, license your art for a period of like a year. But because it's basically displaying in the exact same format as a person who has ownership of that file and is displaying it on their display, do you guys feel like there's any sort of like line cross there? Because I personally don't, because I understand the concept of ownership and provenance on chain. And I actually think that that might be a softer way to introduce people and sort of onboard them. And I know that they even have it where you could put the URL for the actual token there in case somebody was exploring the artwork and displaying it and was like, maybe I want to go ahead and just fully outright own it. But I'm just curious what y'all thoughts are on that.
Tricky. I'm not going to answer. I'm just going to add another example to the mix. And then I saw two hands shoot up immediately after. So I was at the Samsung flagship store here in New York and literally stumbled upon this by accident. But they have the Nifty Gateway. I don't know if it still exists, but Nifty Gateway had an app on the Samsung TVs, not the frame art ones, because those are quote unquote the fine art, and Nifty Gateway didn't make the cut. But on majority of their other TVs, there's a built-in Nifty Gateway app, and you click on it, and it literally lets you click on an artwork. I don't know how it was just randomly at the time generated, but it basically lets you buy let's say it was available on the secondary, but it also had the option to just display. So you didn't need to own it to throw it up on your screen at home and basically get the same benefits as a quote unquote collector. So I just found that interesting. Stephen, I'll hand you the mic. I saw your hand immediately shoot up. So what's your take on this topic?
So it's a really great topic, and I want to make sure that I'm very forthright with the disclosures up front. I talk about them a lot. I'm not sponsored to talk about them a lot. So if anybody wants to say that I'm getting a kickback for mentioning them by name, not so. Um, I'm a huge fan of white walls for this exact reason. Like I really do think that they have a model that communicates it extremely well, that like this is not something that is necessarily owned by the person displaying it. And they did that by creating a entire concept called channels, which is really, really effective, especially because so much of what you do with white walls is you simply put it onto an existing TV, right? And if you're not going to necessarily be using cable, because who the hell uses cable in 2025? You have the opportunity to actually execute channels on your TV, and you can showcase the artwork that you want to showcase that's available in channels, or you can, of course, showcase the work that you own. Now, the dope part about this is I think that you get into this idea of like, okay, fine, like at what point are we going to exhaust pointers, right? At what point do we need to just say, okay, maybe a URL that points back is just completely exhausted? And this is where the original company that, by the way, I should have said back then, also not sponsored by them, um, Atomic Form and Atomic Lore is literally built into white walls now. So you can immediately scan a QR that is like actively, you can just flip it on at the bottom of your screen. And when you scan that QR code, it brings you to all those attestations. It brings you to an exhibition record as long as the artist has logged an exhibition record for their work. And that can provide an incredible amount of provenance just right there on screen. And you don't even necessarily need to be the owner of that work, right? That to me is a really, really powerful feature set. And I hope that more of these display companies move in that direction, because I think that just linking is, well, let's call a spade a spade. Just linking a URL is fucking lazy. Okay. Like this is 2025 we're talking about here. You can do something better. Even if it's like a QR that is linking back to that artist's website, like you can do that. That's a perfectly simple capability that a lot of these companies can implement. So I'm all for the display argument. Like I think that you need to have that out there and you need to be opening that door, but not for the same reason that you had said earlier. The reason that I'm so for the channels approach and looking at how we can share that art farther and wider is because it aids in art discovery. And everyone in this ecosystem continues to echo the same point, myself included, that art discovery currently is broken. And we need more solutions for how to actually explore art. So I would say for sure, like that is a benefit of the channels and being able to showcase art that isn't necessarily your own. And I've even started to see it in certain hotels, right? You have different hotels that are now starting to implement on their screens through different, means, not necessarily, White Walls, Black Dove, any of these others. Well, I'm sorry. I can tell you for sure it's not fucking Token Frame. Um, Sorry, maybe that's a little bit of a vendetta of mine. But these different hotels are now like actually showcasing art in their hotel rooms as like their initial screen. And that's massive. If we can start to move towards on-chain art being shown in those rooms, it's another huge win. So I'm all for it. I think it's a really, really healthy thing, and I'm very, very excited to see it actually progress to the point where you can see art from both Bitcoin and Ethereum L1s in a lot of those environments. So I'm here for it.
So noted Tezos and Token Frame, noted Stephen. But yeah, I'm with you, and I specifically love what White Walls is doing. If I had to bet on anybody right now, it definitely would be them and their approach, because at the end of the day, we're trying to reach scalability, discoverability, making it very easy, presenting it in a familiar format. And yeah, I think that's definitely the way forward. Milton, my co-host, I'll let you skip the line because I see a hand up. Go ahead.
Hey, Steven, you are seriously offending the token frame in my garage collecting dust right now, bro. So you're going to need to state an apology here on
You
the
just gotta,
show.
just for the record, you
Actually,
just gotta
speaking,
laugh out of both me and my wife. Congrats.
dude, so speaking of white walls, I think they are actually going to save the day. I had Devin reach out to me, and apparently, their success stories I'm seeing on the timeline where they are using their software on a token frame to revive it. So back from the dead. We might even get some life out of my token frame that's so sadly positioned in the corner. It's got a dunce cap on. It's like in the corner, facing away. I can't even see the screen. I can only see the back of it. It's really, really sad. But no, I like what you said there about. Now let me give credit to token frame real quickly when it did work briefly for a few seconds. I did like the fact that it had a QR code and that I did have to own it. That was interesting dynamic taking place in the beginning of display tech, where it was this flex back when everybody was proud to own shit that they didn't know about, but was worth a lot of money. We all wanted to prove that we owned it, and I thought that was interesting. What Whitewall is doing, I think, back to your original point about clarity and comms is also awesome because discoverability is what we need. I think that's why rodeo has been championed so much lately. But the discoverability factor, we need to get the art out in the world. I think people like Art Crush, like White Walls, are doing great things in that regard. But it's all about the comms. Like, do I own this piece or do I not? Is this a curated channel that's simply showing what I could potentially own if I so chose and was able to clearly find this artist, maybe like you said, with a QR code via the website, or if I want to dig deeper and get that ownership level, I can. But yeah, the comms are so, so important. But again, I just champion anybody that's actually making the effort to make this discoverable because we still live in quite a vacuum. So I just wanted to echo your praises there. But Jennifer, I see your hands up. What's
No,
going
no, this
on?
is such a valuable conversation for me because, I haven't really used the White Walls product. So I guess I have one question for those who have. So if it is not owned, and doesn't have like a history of provenance, uh, it basically just shows up as an artwork and nothing. Like there's no additional info, or does it say like this artwork is not on chain? Like maybe could you give me sort of like the visual on that?
Yeah, so if I can chime in on this one really quick, with channels in particular, they originally dropped it as a curated platform. So internally, they were curating each and every channel. And I don't believe it was publicly said at the time, but every single artwork that is on ETH automatically populates within atomic form and atomic lore. They have a really incredible system that just does it like that, and it makes it so simple to be able to have that record available via the QR code that populates on the screen naturally, like right there in the moment. It's not even that like an artist or White Walls has to take an action to populate that QR code. It's automatically there. So if you want to go in and view the exhibition record, you want to go in and view, what people have been saying about it online, as long as they have been, making that attestation on chain, it's literally all there for you. It's not even like it's not even complicated, which is it's
Yeah,
insane to say that, but you have, by just clicking through the QR code, an immediate record of who the owner is. So if it's
got it.
still in the artist's wallet, right? If they're holding on to a one of one intentionally, then it's gonna show you that it's in their wallet. Like it's
Got it.
dope.
Yeah. So, because I'm really actually very familiar with Atomic Form. I was one of their like beta users in April, actually before even April of 2024. I think probably around January, February, was starting to work with their product. And I'm familiar with Black Dove, and with Black Dove, it's just a basic URL, and there is a code. There is a QR code on the art when you put it on a display on your TV. But the thing that it does, which I actually like, but it could be improved on, is that it triggers a response with your Apple phone so that it kind of like instigates a sale, right, of the licensing of that art. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't give you like, is this owned on chain or not? And you kind of have to dig more. But I like the idea of with White Walls that the information of whether it's owned or not is sort of upfront. I was just curious, like if it isn't owned and you just want to have art displayed, is it clearly distinguishable that it isn't yet owned? And does it point to where you could potentially own it? Because then I think the reason that I'm asking all of these questions is because I'm a digital gallery owner, and I want to sort of start thinking about the best possible ways that a person who approaches one of the screens is going to interface with it. And I agree, Stephen, like there's already talk in the hotel. The digital gallery that I own is in the lobby, but they loved it so much that they put it up on the second floor. And now there's talks of them doing exactly what you said, which is putting them in the actual rooms and sort of having that be the experience that people have versus like turning on a television and going to cable, which everybody knows, like you said, nobody even does anymore. So it doesn't make any sense for them to continue that sort of model. So I'm just trying to get as much feedback and information as possible from people who have used these products. So thank you.
Steven's the one that's getting sponsored, Jennifer. So anytime, just message him directly. He'll be happy to answer. No, but I definitely, I definitely would advocate for White Walls being the number one kind of proponent and championing us in the right direction. So Jennifer, definitely feel free, message me if you want me to connect you directly with them, but they're a great team. Janine, I see a quick hands up, and I also just wanted to invite Sandman as well. I see you on stage. You're more than welcome to jump in the conversation if you wanted to also add. But Janine, go ahead. I'll start with you.
First, a little side comment, since we're talking about screens. Jennifer and I were just talking about Whim the other day and that they had sort of disappeared off the face of the earth.
They're
but
back.
Then surprise, surprise, they're back. So you never know what might happen. And I wanted to comment to your point, Vasia, earlier about when you were at the Crypt Gallery and there was an artist upset that a collector basically loaned their art that they had collected to the gallery, but they do have the right to do that, right? And they also have the right to sell that piece to someone else. And that's where the artist, you should include the artist if they're a living artist to tell them what's going on. That's a courtesy. But as a collector, if you've collected the one of one and want to loan it to an exhibit, you can do that. So that's a tricky thing, but that seems really common to me that would happen, that somebody would want to be part of an exhibit.
I'm glad you agree. It was a very uncomfortable conversation because, again, this was like early 2021. IRL wasn't being done. We were opening our location in LA, and there was a bunch of artists, a lot of curations. It was a quick timeline, so things like the courtesy of reaching out to everybody. Because it was through a collector, we honestly didn't, but it was a very uncomfortable conversation. And the collector is a very strongly opinionated person, and so he was like flipped out when he heard that from the artist and was like, and he did. The guy spent a pretty penny on that piece, and he was like, I could project this, from the roof of my house if I wanted to, because and I think the artist maybe was under the impression that we were monetizing off of the event, and so they wanted maybe a kickback. And that's where I guess the situation gets a little, a little fine line of, we're using the artist's work to then make money, which we weren't. We weren't selling tickets. It was a completely free public event. And the purpose was really to give the artist the attention, the spotlight, and bring awareness to digital art because it was still so new. People were not aware what NFTs were. But yeah, I think it was just, again, this is a very new industry, learning to navigate it, like seeing different people's reactions. It's, I think, part of the growing pains. But thank you for mentioning that. It does make me feel better that an artist agreed.
Yeah, I do agree. And I'm an artist and a collector too, but I do agree with that. But, it does bring up, again, it's always hard to cover everything. The tricky point of, let's say you decided that you also wanted to sell T-shirts of that art at the gallery. Then people, it goes back to responsibility. Then there is probably a responsibility to circle back to the artist or the estate of the artist if they're no longer living. So I think that's where not that most of the people talking here, because I think this is a very educated, informed, and interested group in trying to do the right thing and find out the right thing. But I think there's a lot of artists across the board that don't know all of sort of the protocol, right? What's legal, what's the protocol, what, and it goes both ways, right? Again, if you had made t-shirts or prints or something from that art to sell, then you would have a right to the artist, but not to display. I totally think that they went overboard. I'm done talking.
Thank you, Janine. And absolutely agree. That would not be our place. And I'm with you there. Sandman, I just wanted to give you the mic. Thank you for joining the stage. Would love to hear your thoughts on the conversation.
Yeah, interesting discussion. Thanks for having me. Um, we talked about, like, I do physical artworks with NFC chips attached, and they have a digital twin with all the provenance of the trace system from Transient Labs. So the digital twin can be traded if the collector doesn't want the burden of the physical. It stays in my climate control storage. And then if they want a KYC and take it, then they can get the physical, but they trade in the digital twin. And it's, a system I've worked out that I think is beneficial. And then with the trace, you can add any type of legal obligations to it, and it's easily accessible through the NFC chip. And you can just see, if you exhibit this, this is what the artist expects. You can put all that online. It's just a matter of finding a consensus within those terms in the industry and standards and trad art world and other things. And it's like we're existing in the digital realm and all that. And yes, a one-to-one digital token is a digital token, but if there's a physical and you're trying to sell it with its provenance as a digital token, that's another set of procedures. And another thing I've thought of is with digital artworks, if you want to offer prints, you could do, say, an edition of 5 or 10 or whatever, and give the collector rights of first refusal. So, and then they could also sell the digital, like 1155 token, like with the example posted up above. You've got a 1 of 1 721, and then you airdrop 5 tokens to the collector and say you can claim a print, charge them for the physical print throughout the burn to claim, and then also they can sell the other 4 tokens and feel an option in the digital kind of tokenized economy that we have. So it's like selling the rights to claim a physical print, and then the provenance is maintained and the digital is destroyed when the print is issued. So it's a matter of maintaining sort of those art world standards of, like, there is only this many in the world and I guarantee it. And that's what the artist's responsibility is. And then the collector's responsibility is to steward the work and exhibit it and work out those types of relationships, I think. So I don't know your thoughts on any of this.
No, I love it. I love, first of all, the integration of the NFC chips and just the merger of the traditional with obviously the digital, the physical, I should say, with the digital. I love what Transient Labs is doing, the tools that they're providing. It's very interesting because, in the beginning, a couple of years ago, before, it sounds like you're holding either the digital or the physical for them so that it cannot be separated, basically, right? Did I understand that correct?
Yeah, you only hold, like, if you want a KYC and get the thing shipped to you, then there's the shipping cost depending on where the collector may be located in the world. It could be thousands of dollars if it's another continent. So to ship, depending on the scale of the physical work. But at the same time, they can't hold the digital with it. They sort of redeem with the digital to gain the physical. The physical is shipped. There's a KYC. There's a sort of documented transactional history, both in paper form or doxed parties contractually, and then they get the physical. And then if they want to sell that physical, they can sell the physical, and it's still linked to me. But it's got the NFC chip with a legalized language to pay the royalty on that. Or you can change the physical back to me, put it in climate storage, and then sell the NFT and do with it what you wish. Put it on an auction or whatever.
Yeah, Sandman, I think that's new. That's a newer concept that I like. I really like actually. Going back to Trevor Jones fan club, let's do it. Why not? He just did a drop, but he ain't the only one. Minotaur Man, Zook just did some experimentation with a new platform called Tribal, for example. And Tribal is of the thought that if we have a digital representation of the art and a physical, that they shouldn't be separated, and really the collector should only be able to possess one at a time. So they have the ability to collect. First, you collect the digital. If you want, like you said, to take possession, you got a KYC, get that shipping address, and then you pay for shipping to you to get the physical. But you've got to send Tribal over the digital, the NFT or the digital art token. So I like that idea personally because a lot of the artwork was getting split otherwise, and then you have multiples, and then you get into that conversation if there's two of the same thing, is it really a one of one? Is it a one of two? So, but I love the form factors. Like I'm all for more form factors, and even better if you've managed somehow technologically to keep them together. I think that's really cool. Or if you burn to redeem, I think that's cool. Eliminate one. So lots of different ways to skin that cat, but I love that the tech's being built out around it. So congrats on experimenting with that. Sounds like you've figured out multiple ways to make that work for
Yeah,
you.
well, it goes back to the Rauschenberg artist contract where, it was like getting the royalties paid in a legal form. And this was a contract made in the 70s where a collector sold an artwork for $80,000 that they had purchased from Rauschenberg maybe for 5,000. And he's like, I'm doing all the work, and he punched his collector, and you need to give me a cut. And so it was born out of that. And this contract exists in the blue chip trad art world, but it's only at that level. And I think artists deserve a certain amount of royalty. Maybe what was common in the last bull run of 10% is too high, but I think royalties really help an artist's career sustain. And if we can get that going and guarantee that provenance, and it's not just like you're making derivative after derivative after derivative. I like the ideas of making other artwork, of course. I'm making digital derivatives of my original sand paintings, for instance. So that's how the idea of prints came up, was I'm making a digital artwork, and then that's the one of one. And prints could be, issued to the collectors, and then they could sell them, or they could redeem them for the price that I put on the print, you know. Um,
I love including the collectors in on the upside of that too. I think that's genius. And Sam, man, you brought up something that's wild. I'm learning art in reverse, digital first, trad later. I thought that this was completely novel concept of the royalties paid on secondary, but apparently I'm wrong on that. I'd love to know your reference. Sounded like Rorschach, but I know that's wrong. That's the test that you take. But see if you could put that in the comments of the name of the artist that started that train, perhaps, then I'd love to do a little more homework on it. But
the
thanks for your
Robert
contributions
Rauschenberg,
to the conversation today, man.
yeah,
Rauschenberg.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Famous
Yeah. If you
installation
throw that in
artist
the
from the
comments,
50s and 60s, and later got into silk screens. But he was partner with Jasper Johns and others, throughout the art scene in the 60s, and famous famously the de Kooning drawing, which is in the San Francisco.
appreciate that history lesson, man. I got a lot to learn, apparently. So, Robert Rauschenberg. All right. Taking notes as
Yeah,
I'm
the
prone to
artist
do here.
contract.
So, good. I learned
I
something
did a
today.
long thread about royalties and stuff back in that Blur period where everybody was farming and not paying royalties and whatnot, and OpenSea versus Blur era. But I'll look up the thread and I'll post it if that's okay.
That would be awesome. I'm actually like PTSD that the royalties were even a debate in this space, but let's not go there. I can't do that right now. But thank you, Sandman, for the contributions. And please, please post that thread. I want to check it out as well. Milton, I thought we were going to keep it to an hour-ish today, but it looks like we're approaching 2. So I just want to take a second and say thank you to all of our speakers that joined the stage and everyone listening in. As always, I like to wrap it up with some key takeaways. I think everyone happened to be in agreement. There was a couple of speakers I was hoping would join because they were going to be the spicy mix. They did have some opposing views I would have loved to hear live, but it's okay. Alas, we'll end it here. I think the number one theme that we all kept just agreeing on is how crucial transparency is in communicating specifically. So regarding, I guess, whatever position people take on this topic, I think it's really important the context in which you choose to release. So if you're going to be minting multiple, make sure you kind of disclose that information at the very beginning, let your collectors know. And I think that that's pretty much the most important. And as always, the conversations and debates that we have are really healthy for the industry. I think just reading through and taking the time to prepare for this space. And I think Jennifer also mentioned it too, like as you kind of listen to the other person's argument, your mind might change a little bit. So I appreciate anyone that might be open-minded and really trying to hear out the other side. I think it's really important for us as we are navigating the Wild West over here and trying to decide what should be normalized behavior and what should maybe be sidelined. So Milton, I don't know if you have any additional comments to add.
No, I think you hit the nail on the head that we are the ones normalizing this, creating the rules. So let's create them in consensus, like on the space that we did today. So great input. Thanks, especially to those new speakers that came in today, Janine and Sandman. Great having you. And I hope you'll join us every week. We're here every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern time, having great conversations like this. Sometimes they're supposed to last an hour and go 4. So that's how good they are. But yeah, I appreciate everybody that was on stage. Stephen, Jennifer, Pepin, who was here, everybody that partook and came and said hello, and everybody in the audience. Obviously, thanks for coming back and seeing us once again.
All right, guys, you know the drill. We're here every Wednesday, 1 p.m. Eastern. I did pin up some tweets, actually my pinned tweet on my profile. We do have a weekly newsletter that's going out to keep you all in the loop. Make sure to register. And if you're enjoying these spaces, if you feel like Milton and I do a decent job at adding some value, we would love some support if you could follow us and even rate Moments the Podcast. We're now on all your favorite podcast platforms like Spotify, like Apple Podcast. It definitely helps us get discovered by new people outside of the ecosystem, and it's a free way to support us. So we would love it if you could check out the pinned tweet. We're on all those platforms. Give us a like, show some love, and it means the world. So Milton, on that beautiful note, let's DJ us out. What kind of vibes are you closing us out with?
We're gonna play a little Krongbin, something chill. We're all in agreement for once, so let's keep it chill.
Thanks for tuning in to Moments the Podcast. If you enjoyed today's conversation, make sure to subscribe and follow us to keep up with all the latest trending Web3 topics. Join us every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern on X for our live space and be a part of the dialogue.